Oh, yes. Caught offside from an apartment in Brooklyn. Bonus edition for you guys. Today we have Jonathan Clegg, Joshua Robinson, authors of Messi versus Ronaldo, One Rivalry, Two Goats, and the Era that Remade the World's Game. So excited to talk to you guys about this book. Welcome to the show.
Thanks so
for
much.
having us.
Where to start? This book is dense. There's so much detail in it. It flows beautifully, though. I've been enjoying reading it. I think I'm about halfway through, but I wanted to go maybe back to your initial idea to write a book right now, because the Messi and Ronaldo era, it's not quite over yet. It's maybe a bit more over for one of them than it is for the other. But Jonathan, why now? Why write this book apart from a forthcoming World Cup, I guess?
Yeah, well, I think that, we did our previous book, The Club, was about the growth of the Premier League and how that became the kind of huge global entertainment monster that it is today. And so I think we felt that after we'd sort of explained the rise of the biggest league, it was time to look at the world's biggest players, the world's biggest stars. And we were aware that with this World Cup coming up, that this would be the last dance for these guys. And so it seemed like the sort of natural time to tell their story, and the story of the sort of worlds that they built, and the sort of impact and changes that they wrought on world football during their sort of decade and a half at the top.
Very curious about the impacts and the changes that they wrought, but we'll get to that a little bit later. Joshua, in terms of, I suppose, Messi in particular, Ronaldo probably equally, very hard to get beyond their cocoon of privacy. How difficult was it talking to people close to them in their orbit to kind of get into the details of their lives?
Yeah, Messi and Ronaldo are not exactly the most forthcoming guys, but because we've been covering this, John and myself, it's for close to 15 years now. We're well entrenched within the world football bubble, and really, it's a matter of once you crack a few sources, which we did for the club. We were able to talk to all the founders of the Premier League and the executives of the top 6 clubs. So we were already kind of in, and as you know, football is such a small world. Everyone seems to know each other, and we had people to vouch for us. So there were a lot of different, let's say, angles of attack. I mean, with Messi, obviously it's heavily focused on Barcelona, but the fact that he went to PSG opened up some more opportunities and avenues for us. And certainly Ronaldo's been at more places. So we had people we were able to get through Man United and through those years. Then we had connections at Real Madrid also that opened some things up for us, and Juve. So, you kind of have to, when you're writing something like this, you really have to kind of triangulate to get to your targets, and figure out the best avenues.
Jonathan, going back to the start of their careers, I suppose when we look at them now, they're personality-wise, they're very, very different. They're very, very different as players, but they had similar kind of struggles coming up in terms of their physicality. That came out in the book a lot at both Sporting and for Messi coming into Barcelona.
Yeah, exactly. I think, Messi, I mean, to this day, does not really look like a sort of world-class athlete. If you passed him in the street, kind of small, slight guy. He's certainly bulked up a little bit since he was a teenager. But yeah, back then, I mean, he looked like, one of the under-8s had sort of wandered onto the, the Barcelona pitch at the Nou Camp. But even Ronaldo, was also, was sort of physically slight and had some, issues when he was coming up. There was the story in the book about how he was sort of ready to join the Sporting first team, but some, medical laws in Portugal prohibited him from joining them for a whole season, which he had to spend still sort of, toiling away in the youth team, banging in like 12 goals a game, just biding his time and waiting for his chance to join the senior squad. I mean, Ronaldo definitely learned much earlier than Messi that time spent in the gym could be profitable. Even as a kid, we've heard all the stories about what a maniac he was at Sporting and how he sort of used to sneak into the gym at night. But his sort of physical transformation really, really explains the story of how he became, the Ronaldo that we know now. That sort of post 2006 World Cup 2-year period when he kind of leveled up and went from, one of the best players in the world to the absolute number one, Ballon d'Or winning, Champions League crushing monster. That was as much as anything about his sort of massive physical transformation, and B, the sort of mental transformation that he underwent, and which we sort of recount in the book in what we like to think of as the sort of Rocky training montage, when he had a month on the sidelines because he was sent off against Portsmouth, and spent that time training at Manchester United, just ruthlessly focused on scoring goals. They estimate he scored 5,000 goals in 2 weeks on the training ground, just learning how to score from every single area, really sort of paring back his game, and like I say, just focusing entirely on sticking the ball in the net. And if you look at his career and his statistics, like before and after, he went from a guy who scored a goal like once every 4 games or so to a guy who averaged a goal, roughly every game, which is completely astonishing.
Yeah, what was slightly astonishing to me was that I'd never heard that story before. The coach was René Meulensteen.
That's right.
I mean, I'm not going to call him obscure, but he managed Fulham, I think, for a little bit. But generally speaking, he's not one of the bigger gurus or names in soccer, and yet he kind of created the pivot that we know from tricky winger to goal scoring machine. Did you find anyone does Ronaldo mention Meulensteen at all? Or has he talked about that period?
Yeah, he definitely credits him with a big change in his game. And we know from their interactions as well that even Ronaldo didn't quite realize what was possible for himself. Maybe one of the few times in Ronaldo's career that he sold himself short. But over that period, it's really amazing to see the detail that Meulensteen was able to go into with us in terms of the drills he was putting in through, figuring out, drilling down into incredible analysis of, which part of your foot is the right part to take this chance from.
Right.
Which part of the goal are you aiming for? What type of finish? In that story, he shows him long videos of some of the great Man United strikers who'd come before him, people like Andrew Cole and Teddy Sheringham and Dwight York. And he said, what do they have in common? And he says, well, it's a lot of goals. And Meulensteen tells him, well, a lot of these are just tap-ins. A lot of these are very simple finishes. And that's what he needed to give Ronaldo the tools to do. We saw over the following seasons, Ronaldo was capable of all kinds of finishes, and he made them all look easy.
Yeah, one of the weird things I was just going to say, one of the sort of slightly a sort of disconnect that exists between Ronaldo's sort of public perception and what he's actually like is when you mention about does he sort of credit Meulensteen. Ronaldo is actually very, very gracious about all the coaches and other sort of staff members that he's worked with during his career. Makes time for, guys from the sporting academy who he hasn't seen in like 25 years. If he sees them or if they come visit him at Real Madrid, he gives them the VIP treatment, makes time for them. So, he's very much, very gracious about the sort of work that he did with Meulensteen and credits him with, that sort of, like I say, that the sort of mental switch that turned him into like a real killer.
Do you think, Jonathan, that there's, and again, I'm being a bit Freud here, but that there's a connection with, he had that strong connection with Ferguson that Messi didn't really have with Guardiola. The connection with René Meulensteen there, and the way he talks about all his coaches, was there some kind of him using these coaches almost like a paternal figure that he didn't really have, or is that maybe, am I pushing?
I mean, I like that seems like a sort of, from my zero experience of psychology, it seems like a sort of, I guess maybe. I mean, the way that I sort of tend to think about it is, and this is true of Messi too, is Ronaldo is just a football animal. Like, he loves football so much that anyone who he thinks can sort of help him improve, can teach him something, he's just a sponge. He just loves to learn and think and talk and practice and train. That's all he lives for. Football is all he has. You know, I think in terms of the psychological aspect, I do think that like the fact that both these guys were sort of uprooted from their homes and placed into sort of what is essentially a professional football setting at very young ages meant that they sort of became very single-mindedly focused on football and making themselves professional footballers and the best footballers they can be. And that's why they both sort of share this just sort of very kind of, you know, laser focus on football. And so I think, you know, the paternal thing like seems like a sort of a very easy, sort of thing to draw on, because, you know, Ronaldo's a lack of his own sort of father figure, who died when Ronaldo was in his early 20s. And wasn't present much during his time in Portugal. But I do think that it's, as much as anything, it's just he gravitates to these coaches just because he just loves football.
There is two key figures that emerge early in the book for both the characters, and it's now, are we saying George or Jorge?
We sort of mix it up. Sometimes we'll go with a Jorge Messi, we usually do, and George Mendes. But you know, yeah. All
right. Well, we'll say the two Jorges just for it. Mendes and Messi. Joshua, to me, they come across as Mendes as this kind of opportunist, a hustler, a guy who saw Ronaldo as his ticket out of, well, not out of, I suppose his ticket right to the very top. And then Messi as more of a blunt force kind of guy who says, listen, give me more money or this guy goes to Real Madrid. Is that a fair characterization of both characters?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because Mendes was, or is a creature of pure ambition. He knew from the very beginning, even when he was running a video store in Portugal, that he wanted to become one of the most powerful figures in world football. And he's managed to do that. It wasn't, obviously Ronaldo is his biggest client, and Ronaldo sees him as a father figure, as we were just discussing. But he understood that, and he understood the machinations of football very quickly as well. I mean, his first client was Nuno Espirito Santo, the former goalkeeper and manager of Wolves and Spurs. And when he was trying to force a move for him, he actually disappeared him. It was like a light kidnapping. But he was prepared to do anything that was required to secure moves for his clients to bigger clubs. So he was already wheeling and dealing. Messi's dad became an agent quite by accident. It's really just because his kid happened to be the most talented player anyone had ever seen at that age. And so his agenting was not really the work of a businessman. It was the work of a dad trying to make sure that he's able to secure as much money as possible from the biggest clubs as possible for his son and his family. But yeah, there's certainly not a lot of guile or tact in the way Jorge Messi does business. Jorge Mendes is a little bit more calculating. I think it's fair to say.
There's an amazing story in the book, Joshua, where Mendes is so desperate, or he understands how important it is to get in front of people and to be in front of Sir Alex Ferguson, that he gets in a car accident, mutilates his ear, and yet still travels to go and see Alex Ferguson.
Yeah, he's sitting in the meeting with Ferguson with a bloody ear, having nearly had it torn off after crashing his Porsche. And I think that was a real testament to his commitment. But I think the perhaps most disappointing part of that is not any scarring for Mendes. It's the fact that Ferguson didn't remember he was there.
Yeah. Yeah.
All that effort, all that gauze wadded onto his ear.
Yeah, and a flight.
He didn't even remember him.
And a flight in which he was in probably a lot of pain, and he just doesn't remember.
Exactly.
That's a tough one to take. One of the many enjoyable things about the book so far for me is things I have either forgotten or didn't know at all. I would say didn't know at all. The fuss, Jonathan, over Messi not playing in the World Cup quarterfinal, I believe it was, in 2006. And his general limited minutes in that 2006 World Cup stood out to me. And it stood out from the fact that Messi, from a very young age, he wielded a lot of media interest and a lot of influence. And when he had that little strop on the sideline in the quarterfinal, that created headlines for weeks after.
Yeah, that's right. I think one of the sort of, it's funny that you talk about maybe you didn't know it or you didn't remember it, because I do think that the way that we remember Messi's career, I think we sort of think that he just sort of turned up at Camp Nou as a teenager and was like immediately incredible, and just started banging goals left, right, and center, and there was no stopping him. But there was this sort of strange period at the very beginning of his career, when Rijkaard was in charge of Barcelona, and Messi wasn't always in the team, and he wasn't an established starter for Argentina. And this is the same time when another story from the book is about how both Messi and Ronaldo were signed by Nike at this time. Yeah. And Nike, who had only basically started getting involved in football a decade earlier, somehow landed both Messi and Ronaldo to shoe deals at the same time while they were just teenagers. But ultimately, Nike let Messi go. Adidas came in with a rival offer, and Nike didn't match it because they weren't convinced that Messi was going to make it. He didn't look like an athlete as far as they were concerned. Certainly didn't eat like an athlete. Back then, he was just devouring pizza and Pepsi for every meal. And so they let him go. And I think that whole period, that miserable 2006 World Cup where he didn't play as much as he had expected that he would, the season before with Barcelona where he missed the Champions League final through injury, he did suffer with injuries early in his career that looked like they might sort of blunt some of his talent. And I think that like we kind of tend to forget that because we sort of know the contours of Ronaldo's career better, and I do think that sort of cloudy period for Messi is something that we tend to forget.
Guys, I just wanted to ask a couple of general overall questions here, and thanks so much for your time. I suppose one of them is, and I don't like to put things in binaries, but you talk in the book about how this era changed football, and undoubtedly it did. Joshua, do you think that the Messi-Ronaldo era, and again, I'm being very broad here, but bear with me, was it good for football that these two guys became the center and absorbed so much of our interest and our time over the past 10 to 12 years?
I think that's a very fair question. And really, it depends on who you ask. Barcelona and Real Madrid both benefited from having two of the greatest players of all time in their squads, and raked in trophies and accolades during those periods. But at the same time, we know today they paid an extremely heavy price, and that Messi and Ronaldo left some serious wreckage behind them. By the time Messi left, Barcelona was in debt to the tune of over $1 billion. And that's in large part because they were paying him a salary that was worth multiple fighter jets. It was a really astronomical sum of money that wasn't sustainable. And part of it is also down to the fact that because you have guys of that quality on your team for so long, it would be seen as a crime against football to not give them a supporting cast that's on that level. So it's not just paying the huge salaries of a Messi and a Ronaldo, it's also bringing in the top quality players to put around them. And in most cycles of great teams, those last 3 or 4 years, and then you have a rebuilding phase. Barcelona and Real Madrid never had that chance, really. They just had to keep bringing in superstars to, even if it didn't always work, but to keep spending on a certain level to give those guys a chance. So for them, it was not so great. And as we know now, those dire financial straits by about 2018, 2019 were what planted the seeds of the Super League. That's when the super clubs, Barca and Real Madrid, and then Juve, which also spent lavishly on Ronaldo, started realizing that they were not in a sustainable model, and it was time to do something quite drastic.
Jonathan, and I suppose it kind of branches out from that question about was this a good or a bad era? and it depends on who you talk to. But as individuals, so what Messi and Ronaldo went through as individuals, or the status they attained, what does that mean now for, say, the two biggest stars right now, who I'm just going to say are Kylian Mbappe and Erling Haaland? How is the landscape changed for them? What will they have to go through now because of the era of Ronaldo and Messi?
Yeah, well, I think, you know, one of the biggest things is that Messi and Ronaldo were sort of the first players who became bigger than the clubs that they played for. You know, certainly with Messi, at times, you know, he sort of seemed to be the sort of physical embodiment of Barcelona, and Barcelona would have done, I mean, literally did whatever it could to keep him happy, whether that was, you know, firing one of the directors who dared to, you know, suggest that Messi wasn't, you know, the sort of complete dependence on Messi wasn't perhaps the best thing for the team. They would, you know, he would identify transfer targets, and the club would do their best to sort of bring in the guys that he wanted. He was essentially like the general manager of the team, basically, because he was so important to the club on the field, but also the brand, the identity of the club. And I think, you know, and the same was very much true of Ronaldo, you know, at Real Madrid. They were, you know, that they both realized the power that they wielded and how they could influence these, you know, century-old clubs to basically do their bidding. And I think that you've already seen that inheritance has passed down to Mbappe, whose you know, new contract at PSG made it very clear that he's the most important person at the club, that he's essentially bigger than the club. And you're already starting to see, you know, the fallout that's come with that, where now he's not happy with the way that the team's lining up or the way the team's playing or how much he's paid, and maybe he's going to try and get away in January and yada yada yada. You know, Messi and Ronaldo had to, you know, spend years building up to the stage where they were given the keys to the club like that. You know, right. They had years and years of consistent performance and winning Champions League trophies before they you know, were sort of given that position. And Mbappe's already got it like 23 with one of the richest teams in the world. So you know, I think, yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see how the Mbappe Haaland era plays out, and you know, particularly that sort of side of the dynamic, like the as players become bigger than the clubs that they play for, their brands overshadow, you know, those of the teams that they belong to. What does that mean for football? Will we get you know, will it become more like the NBA, where players sort of, you know, plot their moves and jump from team to team, and they sort of take the team sort of almost like takes on the brand of their biggest star, right? Yeah. Like LeBron has played for a bunch of different teams, but essentially it's always like LeBron's team. Will football go the same way? Maybe.
Final question, guys. How does this finish? We have Messi chasing that final Champions League trophy, we assume, with PSG. There's talk of him coming to Inter Miami, coming to America to finish out his career, and Ronaldo in a kind of in almost another zone now where nobody can really afford him. So Joshua, where does this end from the playing standpoint for these guys?
I think they're asking the same question. You know, we know, or we have a pretty good inkling at this stage that a year from now, neither Ronaldo nor Messi will be at the clubs they're with at the moment. You know, with Messi, could that mean a move to MLS? That would make a lot of sense. I think financially, especially in the recent years, as he himself has become more focused on, you know, maximizing his business empire. We saw it with many of the things he did as he moved to PSG. With Ronaldo, it's you know, we know that he wants to stay in the Champions League somehow with whoever might pay him. It would require a pay cut. We know that also. But I don't think that last Champions League trophy is necessarily out there for him. For now, though, the focus is very much on the World Cup. And, you know, I think both of them have kind of designed the past 18 months to be in the best possible condition at the World Cup. And, you know, I think we all know as well that if one of them could somehow win it, and Argentina is probably in a better position than Portugal, it would certainly settle the debate once and for all.
Well, guys, it's been a fascinating read so far for me. I can't wait to finish the book out. It's Messi versus Ronaldo, one rivalry, two GOATs, and the era that remade the world's game. Joshua Robinson, Jonathan Clegg. Guys, thanks so much for taking time to talk to us today on the show.
Thank you. Our pleasure.
Thanks so much.